Good evening. Welcome to our continuation in our series of lectures on the final events of Bible prophecy. Our topic tonight, as was advertised last night, is time running out. You may remember last night, for those who were here watching this lecture, we looked at a famous prophecy of the Bible from the book of Daniel in Daniel chapter 2. And we finished last night with this text, Daniel chapter 2 verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. This is the verse we finished with last night, and we discovered last night about this famous prophecy, this metallic man, as it were, of the head of gold, the chest and the arms of silver, the belly and the thighs of brass, the legs of iron, the feet of iron and clay, and how this stone came out of nowhere, as it were, destroyed this image, ground it to powder, and the chaff, the dust, as it were, blew away as the chaff of a summer threshing floor. And we found out in this particular prophecy that this represented the kingdoms, the main kingdoms of the world: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. And down in the feet of iron and clay, we discovered that this represented the divided kingdoms of the world, the divided kingdoms beginning there in Europe. And the Bible told us in verse 44 there, in the days of these kings, in the days of these divided nations of the world, will the God of heaven set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Now, we discovered there last night that those original divided kingdoms, those 10 toes, those 10 original kingdoms, were set up by the year 476 AD. The Roman Empire basically is slowly disintegrating. The Germanic tribes came down from the north. They slowly settled in to the Roman Empire. And the year 476 AD was the year we found that those kingdoms were set up. Now the Bible's telling us, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. And we are still living in the days of these kings. But you may have done some quick mathematical calculations and thought, well, the days of these kings, 476 AD, right down to the year 2008 in which we live today, is a big gap of over 1,500 years. When will God set up his kingdom? When will God set up this everlasting kingdom? If it's already been 1,500 years since the days of these kings, maybe it'll be another 1,000 years. Maybe it could be another 2,000 years. Can we be more specific when God will set up his kingdom? Can we be more specific when Jesus Christ will come back to this earth to set up that kingdom that God has promised for all those who want to serve and follow him? I believe the answer to that question is yes. We can be more specific, even though there's been a big gap in the divided nations of this world since the demise of the Roman Empire. We are finding today that there are events taking place. And don't forget, we're studying the final events of Bible prophecy. We want to come right down to the day which we live and see what the Bible says about the time we live in and what the future events are. But we are seeing things take place in our world right now before our very eyes that are telling us that this event, the second coming of Christ, and God setting up his eternal kingdom are very close at hand. We pick up our story tonight in the book of Matthew chapter 24, and we find in Matthew 24, in the first couple of verses there, in verse 3, we find that Jesus Christ is sitting alone upon the Mount of Olives. And his disciples have some questions, and they come to him, the Bible says, and they ask those questions. And I want you to notice what these questions are, or this particular question. Notice here, Matthew 24, looking at verse 3. And as he, which is talking about Jesus, sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, now notice this question, tell us, when shall these things be? Now notice these questions. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Friends, what a question that is. They come to Jesus Christ privately. They have this big burden on their heart. They say, Lord, when shall these things be? What will be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? You know, friends, it's a question that's been asked for centuries. When will the world end? Will it end? What will be the sign of thy coming, they asked. How will we know you're coming back to this earth to set up this eternal kingdom? And when will the end of the world be? You know, the end of the world is something that frightens people. And the Bible speaks often about the end of the world. This sinful, sad, sin-sick world we live in will not last forever. It won't go on for eternity. God will put an end to sin and suffering and death. And that will take place at the second coming of Christ. And the disciples are saying, well, Lord, how do we know when this will take place? What a question. It's been asked for 2,000 years. When will Jesus come back? When will heaven begin? Now, Jesus Christ didn't come along and say, listen, on such and such a date and such a year, I'm going to come back and that'll be the end of the world. Jesus didn't do that. He didn't give a specific date. In fact, Jesus himself said in the same chapter, no man knows the day or the hour. But he did give us something of which we could understand roughly when the time is. He begins to give the disciples specific signs of what the world will be like just prior to him coming back to this world again. And we're going to look tonight at 18 signs that the Bible gives. Many Christians call them the signs of the times that are telling us, I believe, that time is running out for planet Earth. The first sign that Jesus gave the disciples there in Matthew 24, they asked that question, Lord, what will be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? The very first sign that Jesus gives his disciples is the war sign. Matthew 24 and verse 6, the Bible says, Jesus said, and ye shall hear of wars and rumours of wars, for nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. You know, friends, I don't have to remind you in this world that we live in today that this world is a world that's racked by war. We have had in the last century, or even less than a century, 2 world wars. World War I, World War II. In a time when there's talks about peace and peace and peace, we have war and war and war. In fact, today, as we speak today, there's been such a proliferation of war that we have between 35 and 39 wars continually being fought on planet Earth. In terms of dollars, the world spends around about $1 trillion a year simply on war. And as I said, we have the United Nations and we have peace process after peace process. And the more we talk peace, sadly, the more we find we are in war. Friends, the war sign is being fulfilled right before our eyes as never before. Never in the history of mankind have we had war as we've had war in the last 60 and 70 years. Now, the next sign that Jesus gives in verse 7, Matthew 24, verse 7, he says, and there shall be famines. He says, there will be wars in diverse places, nations against nations, but there will also be famines, he says. Do we see the famine sign being fulfilled in our world today? You know, right now as I speak, there are around about 800 million people on this earth that are suffering for want of food. They are malnourished. Every day, as every day goes by, we are told around about 35,000 children die of hunger, malnutrition,